show you today how easy it is to pressure can chicken. You might be a little bit surprised in me saying it's easy, but bear with me, it really is. And at the end, I will give you a little sneak peek on how good it tastes. Well, maybe not on how good it tastes because you can't taste it, but I will show you, and hopefully you'll be able to see that it is really, really appealing and it looks juicy and tender. So stick around to the end so you can check that out. As well, feel free to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification button that you see there with the little bell, and that way you won't miss out when I post new videos. You will be automatically notified as soon as they're posted. Now, in all honesty, when I started doing some canning and pressure canning, and people were talking about how they pressure can meats, and I gotta be honest, and I really didn't think that I would ever be pressure canning some meat. First of all, it didn't appeal to me. Looking at meat in a jar, I'd seen some before, and it still really doesn't look that great when you look at some chicken in a jar. But when you look at how convenient it is to just get home from a long day at work, or you're pressed for time because you have to run out to a soccer practice or some activity that you have going on, and all you need to do is pop off the cover of a jar of chicken. It's really worth it, and the chicken is really delicious and it's tender, and so I started doing my own chicken and canning my own chicken because of it. So they told me, try it, just try it once and you'll see it's so nice to have some canned meat on hand. So I tried it and I actually really did enjoy it. Like vegetables, when you're doing your meats, you want to make sure that you have good quality meat. You don't want to buy a cheap, fatty piece of meat to put in a jar, because it will get tender for sure, but you're looking at different things that can happen by canning a low quality meat. First of all, if it's high in fat, it could affect your seal, and it could affect the taste of your meat as well. So you really want to put in a good quality meat in your jars. Remember, the better the quality of the product that you put in your jars when you're canning, the better the quality it's going to be when you eat it. So always keep that in mind. So I have all my chicken here waiting to be cut up. You should cut, like chicken especially, or if you're doing beef, you cut it across the grain so it'll make it more tender, and try to cut them in equal sizes, uniform sizes, so that when you're canning, they'll can evenly. My chicken is frozen just because well, it's not completely frozen, it's starting to thaw, but just because I find it's easier to cut up my chicken. But make sure that if you're dealing with a meat that's partially frozen, that it needs to be completely thawed before you put it in your bottle. Just give it a little bit of time to thaw. So that's what's nice about this, is that you can, if you see a big sale on chicken, you can run out and buy your chicken, and if you don't have time, no worries, throw it in the freezer, and when you have time to do it, that's where you get prepared and you do it. These are the projects that I save for when the garden is done and all the vegetables have been looked after, and so that's when I kind of get into more of doing some meats, or doing some dehydrating, or doing different kinds of sauces with the stuff that I've canned, like my tomatoes during the summer. So I save that for the garden or the summer, after summer downtime, and that's when I get these different projects done. You want to make sure, like I said, to remove all the fat. I mean, these are chicken breasts, so there's not a whole lot of fat, but if there are some like tendons or things in them, or I'm not quite sure what sometimes those harder pieces are in chicken, but you want to remove those as well. And like I said, you want to cut it across the grain so you get a really nice, even more tender chicken than what it'll already be. And then you just cut them. So you just do this until you've got all your chicken cut up. Just to give you different ideas of what you can do with chicken. I know I've had those mornings when you get up and you have one of your kids get up with a head cold, or a fever and not feeling well, and so what I do with my chicken is that I can it with some chicken broth, some homemade chicken broth that I make. So if I have a child or myself or somebody in the house who's gotten up and kind of feeling under the weather, I can make chicken noodle soup in about the time that it takes me to cook either some noodles to put in it, or because all you need to do is open up your jar of chicken, cooked chicken with your broth, and heat it up on the stove with your noodles, and you have a good healthy chicken noodle soup, not loaded with all that sodium, all that salt that you buy in the stores, within 10 minutes. Pressure canning chicken as well is one of those things that really doesn't take a lot of time. This is what takes the most time, is just cutting up your chicken, and after this all you do is put it in your bottles. So it's really quick, not a whole lot of prep time. I guess what takes the longest with chicken is just the processing time in the can. And you don't have to use, I'm using boneless, skinless chicken breasts, but you can even can your chicken with the bones in. You can leave bones in the chicken. You don't have to use the boneless kind. You just need to adjust your processing times, and that's it. I would remove the skins if you buy your chicken with the skin on it, because the skin is really high in fat, and like we say, you don't want to have a lot of fat inside your bottle. If you decide to put chicken with the bones in it, I'm going to be canning these in the 500 milliliter pint size jars, but you can even if you're going to leave the bone in, it's going to take more space, so you can do them in 1 liter jars, the quart size jars. There are 2 ways that you can prepare your chicken for bottling. So you can do the raw pack method, which is what I am doing here. I personally prefer the raw pack method just because it's simpler, and I tend to prefer to do things to keep things simple. So you don't cook your chicken, you just put it raw inside of your jars. This is my preferred method. I haven't tried the other method, just to say. And then there's the hot pack method. So the hot pack method consists of you cooking your chicken until it's 2/3 done, and then canning it in that way. So either way is acceptable. So I'm gonna just get through cutting through all this chicken, and then we'll be able to can it. I've got my broth all here nice and warm. My sealing caps are here, warm in the pot. My jars clean from the dishwasher. My chicken all cut up. Everything's all set up. One thing to note when it comes to doing your meat is that your jars are just room temperature. As you can see, I don't have them warming on the stove in a pot. So that's why I don't have my liquid boiling hot. My caps are never boiling hot anyway. I've got my canner on the stove slowly warming up. I don't want to get my canner too hot and then put these bottles in and then cause any kind of breaking. So that's just one thing to note when it comes to putting your meat in jars, just to keep your jars cool. So we're going to get this started, and we're going to start by packing our chicken inside our jars. So you just go about and you put it in. When you're canning chicken, you need to leave a very generous 1-inch headspace. So you need to leave 1 inch of room on top of your jars to allow for it to expand. So because you don't want your jars to break. You definitely don't want them to break when you're doing chicken. It's expensive. I am using chicken broth, my chicken broth that I've made, to add some extra liquid. You're not going to be adding a lot of liquid to this because chicken kind of packs down pretty well. So try to keep one hand clean. And salt is optional. If you're not using chicken broth and just using water to add liquid, you can add half a teaspoon. I'm going to be a little bit conservative on the salt just because my broth is salted. It's not overly salted, so I'm just adding maybe 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And remember, when adding your salt, you need to be using either a sea salt or a pickling salt anytime you're canning. You can't be using your regular table salt. It's not appropriate for any kind of home canning when you're looking at pressure canning. So be really slow with your liquid because it's not going to take up a lot of liquid. And make sure, as usual, that you remove your air bubbles. So with this, it's even more important. So now that I've run this through, I've no longer got any liquid at all on top. You don't want any of your jars to break ever, but when you're doing meat, which is, you know, a little bit more expensive, I guess, than doing vegetables. Make sure you leave that 1 inch. It's really important. I'm just going to go back again and readjust because I know it's going to go down some more. And your chicken is also going to create some natural juices as well when it's cooking. So, you know, don't be too concerned if you don't have a lot of liquid in there. Some places where you look, it's even going to say that you don't need to add any liquid at all. So I like to kind of add the chicken broth in. It kind of gives it a little bit of extra flavor. It's really important to clean the rims of your jar. When you're doing vegetables, you're going to be using water. Anything that contains meat, whether it's like a spaghetti sauce or a meat sauce, soups that have meat in it, canning meat, you need to clean your rims with vinegar. It's going to remove any fats that would be there or any, you know, chicken particles that could go bad, and it will take away the fat as well and to create the proper seal. So always use vinegar when cleaning the top of your jars if you're dealing with meat. I'm going to wipe down my jars with the vinegar. And another reason as well that's fun for wearing gloves when I deal with meat is when it comes to meat, I tend to lean towards the paranoid side of wanting to keep everything nice and contamination free. So I'm washing my hands a lot. And so wearing gloves, it's just not quite so hard on my hands where where they're all dried out and cracked. So you're going to take your vinegar and clean the rim of your jar. Really well. You want to make sure that your caps seal. So then you're going to take I have a magnetic, I'm stuck. You're going to center your cap on top of your jars. Take your sealing ring and you're just going to put them on fingertip tight. You don't want them too tight. And then transfer your jars to your canner. Do this until you've gone through all your chicken and put them in your jars. I have quite the large batch of chicken going on here, and the reason for that is I kind of like to fill up my canner as much as I can. In this size canner that I have, I can fit 18 jars, so you can actually stack your jars when you're pressure canning. So you put an extra layer, an extra rack is what I'm looking for, and then you can stack a whole other row of jars on top. If you've never pressure canned before, I do suggest that you kind of do a little bit of research. I don't go into as much detail making these videos because I want to try to keep them shorter, but I do have a more detailed video on pressure canning that really goes through all the steps, that goes through all the do's and don'ts and the important things that you should know when you get into pressure canning. So I do suggest that you check that out if you've never pressure canned. I have my first layer done, so I'm going to add my rack and continue stacking on the second layer. Here you want to stagger the bottles so they're not directly one on top of the other. I have all my bottles in my canner. The next thing I need to do is put the cover on and seal the pot. I've increased the heat and we're going to bring this to a good boil to vent the pot. My pot has come to a good hard boil and I've got a steady stream of steam here that's coming out from the vent that I can feel. Maybe can't see too much, and that button has come up. So I'm going to time 10 minutes because you need to vent your pot for 10 minutes. Just one little side note. When you're pressure canning meats, the processing time is usually a little bit longer. It's going to be 75 minutes, but you don't need to increase the quantity of water that you put in your pot at the beginning. Now I'm going to time 10 minutes to vent my pot. The pot has been venting for 10 minutes. Now we're going to build up the pressure. So I'm going to put my weighted gauge on top of the vent to stop the steam from escaping, and that's what's going to help build up the pressure. I know for my area I need to get to 10 to 11 pounds of pressure to process my jars. The altitude that you live at is really what determines to how many pounds of pressure you need to can to. I only start timing my chicken and my jars once I get to the desired pounds of pressure. And it gets a lot quieter too once you do that. Now that it's reached 8 to 9 pounds of pressure, I do start to gradually reduce the heat on my stove. Otherwise it gets to 10 fast and it boils really hard. So I start to gradually decrease it, maybe just like half a number or one number at a time on my stovetop. When it gets to 10 pounds of pressure, you're going to see the weighted gauge here. It's going to start to rattle, and that'll tell me that I'm at 10 pounds of pressure. When you're pressure canning, one of the most important pieces of advice that I can give you is to always keep your eyes on your pressure canner. Don't go away and start doing other tasks. So as you can see, my dial is hitting 10 pounds of pressure and the weighted gauge is now starting to dance. It's exactly what you're looking for. So now that I've hit 11 pounds of pressure, or just about, probably by the time I get talking I'll be at 11, we're going to start timing our jars. For the 500 milliliter or the quart size jars with the bones inside, so you've left the bones in your chicken, you need to process them for 65 minutes. If you're like me and you're doing the boneless chicken, you need to process for 75 minutes. If you're using the quart size jars or the 1 liter jars with the bone in, it's 75 minutes and the boneless is 90 minutes. I will put the processing times in the description below so you can have a look. So now we time for 75 minutes. You continue to decrease the heat on your stove if it starts to creep up past your 11 pounds of pressure. So the time is up. So now what needs to happen is I'm going to transfer it over to the other side. Now remember that this is going to be really heavy because it's full of jars full of chicken. If you can't move it, you're better off leaving it there. But if you can move it, you can slide it, no, not slide it, but you can lift it over to the other side and it'll help it cool down a little bit faster. Use your pot holders because everything is really hot. So what needs to happen now is the dial needs to go down to 0 and this button needs to drop. Once that happens, we'll be able to remove the weighted gauge and then open the cover. Now that the dial has gone down to 0, the button has just dropped. We're going to remove the gauge, the weighted gauge, and now we have to wait another 10 minutes before we can open our cover. We're almost there, we're almost done. So the 10 minutes are up. It's safe to take off the cover. Make sure you use pot holders and lift the cover away from your face so the steam doesn't come barreling to your face. Now I know I said we were almost done, but just one more 10 minutes before we can remove them from the pot. You just need to leave them sitting there for another 10 minutes. You can see oh, that was one that just capped, and you can see that it's still boiling really hard. The jars are still really hot. You want to put your bottles in a place in your kitchen where they're going to remain untouched for 24 hours. So you hear them sealing. That's always great to hear. Here I have 17 jars, not quite the 18 jars for a full batch, but I'm very happy with 17 jars of canned chicken. So now we wait for 24 hours to see the final product. 24 hours have gone by and I have ended up with all these bottles of jarred chicken breast. I am so excited. Remember that before you store your jars, you need to remove all your rings. You don't store these with the rings on because if ever they uncap, they unseal, this could cause it to create a false seal, so you never store them with their caps on. So you take these off, wash them, and use them again for next time. Maybe running out of shelf space with all this canning that you've been doing, you still shouldn't be stacking your bottles one on top of the other. Try to make a makeshift shelf on top of your bottles, but don't stack them one on top of the other. That as well could affect your seal. Make sure to write the date and the product on top of your jars. On the cover, because eventually you will forget what you put in your bottle. Trust me, you will forget. So it's important to write that on top of your bottle as well. One thing I do want to show you is the finished product, because you know, you may be skeptical, as I was at first, to put chicken in a jar. You look at it and you're like, well, you know, it may not be that appealing, and so I just want to show you the finished product. I always use one of these to open my jars of chicken or anything that I've got canned. I find it just makes it a lot easier than trying to wrestle it open with a knife. So I just put one of these on the side, and this is what a properly sealed jar will sound like. So it was really well sealed. So now, just want to show you how this looks. I wish you could taste it, but unfortunately you can't. But I just want to show you first of all how tender this is. So I've just got 2 forks, and I tell you, I'm barely touching my forks, and the chicken just breaks apart. Like, it's so tender. Anyway, you can use this anywhere, and adding your favorite sauce to make pulled pork. Well, not pulled pork, I guess it's chicken, but, and I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but you can even see like all the juices. Like, it's not dry at all when you taste it. So you really end up with a nice end product. When you do any kind of canning or food preservation, and you know there's a storm coming up, and they always say, well, make sure that you have 3 days supply for emergencies. It's a good backup system as well for power outages or emergencies as well. But and in an emergency, this could mean getting home from work and not having time to make supper. So anyway, it's very convenient. I hope you've enjoyed this video on how to pressure can chicken. I hope I've made a believer out of you anyways. If you like the content, leave me comments in the comments section. Give me some ideas on things you'd like to see me try out. Hit that subscribe button at the bottom of the screen, and be sure to check out for any other projects that might be coming out soon.